Virginia, and he'd been a captain. His name was John. They always just called him Jack. But anyway, during a conversation that Jouett overheard, he found out that Tarleton was going to attack where a group of Virginia legislators were, including Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson was Monticello, and at Charlottesville, a group of legislators, Virginia legislators, were there. Well, Jouett did something that I've got to be honest with you, ladies and gentlemen, has been one of the most unsung things in American history. Open an American history book, and yeah, you'll get a little mention of Paul Revere anymore. The history books have gone so bad now they don't even hardly mention even Paul Revere. But you'll mention Paul Revere and his famous Midnight Ride. But what do you ever hear about Jack Jouett's ride? And Jack Jouett's ride, historians will say, most historians, the ones that are not writing the textbooks, that is, they will say that Jouett's ride was far more important than Paul Revere's. Because if Thomas Jefferson had been captured, he would have been executed. And any legislator of the colonial legislature that was in rebellion would have been executed. Now, if Thomas Jefferson had been hanged, what kind of message do you think that would have sent to the colonists? Maybe it's time to say God save the king again and be done with it. But Jouett did something that was extraordinary. He rode 40 miles to warn Jefferson and the legislators that Tarleton and his men were after them. And he saved them. Now, some did get caught, but they were just slowly moving. But Jefferson did. I can only imagine. Somebody says, well, Tarleton's coming, and they say, well, I don't see him. And they just went back to bed, and then they were captured. But you have Jouett making this ride over backcountry roads. Paul Revere rode on an open road with the full moon shining. And as you probably know, ladies and gentlemen, he never even finished his ride. He was captured by the British. And actually, Dr. William Dawes and a man named the name of Prescott would finish. And here's something I don't know if you all know or not, because even when I was doing research, I was shocked by this, because all my life I had been told, Paul Revere's famous ride, and you just think Paul Revere's out there by himself. Well, of course, I found out quickly about Dr. Dawes and Mr. Prescott. But do you realize there were 40 people riding that night? There were 40 people spreading the alarm. It wasn't just Paul Revere. The only reason Paul Revere is remembered to this day is a poem that Henry Wadsworth Longfellow wrote, and that he picked Revere because he was Massachusetts and everything like that. He picked Revere, and of course there's an alliteration with Revere's name too. If you remember, listen, my children, and you shall hear of the midnight ride of Paul Revere. That sounds nice, doesn't it? Listen, my children, and you shall hear of the midnight ride of Dr. Dawes. That doesn't do it. But all these other people were riding. Paul Revere gets captured. He does talk his way out of being captured and does finally finish. But the people who actually gave the alarm was not Paul Revere, but Jouett rode by himself through all of this backcountry roads in darkness, thick as, you can imagine how thick it would be without moonlight in those days. He made it. He warned, saved Jefferson, saved many of the legislators, and he was so well thought of that Virginia actually voted him thanks officially and presented him with 2 pistols and a sword. Unfortunately, Virginia was a little bit slow in giving things, and I don't think the sword actually got to Jouett until 20-some years later. But it was a slow go. But can you think what he should have been, what should have been said about him? And Jack Jouett was 6'4" and weighed over 220 pounds. And I mean, he was riding that horse in the middle of the night doing all of that. But on June the 3rd, 1781 is when he made that famous ride. Now, one of the things that I do want you to remember about this, and there was a little poem written about Jack Jouett. It appeared in the Charlottesville Daily Press in 1909, and I didn't write it all down because it was a little bit long and not very good. But the ending of it was, or the beginning was, "Here goes to thee, Jack Jouett. Lord, keep thy memory green. You made the greatest ride, sir, that ever yet was seen." Not going to win any prizes, but it was a good poem. Jouett after his famous ride, will be in Virginia until 1782, and then he will come to Kentucky. He will not come to Woodford County at first. He'll go to Mercer County, and there he'll marry Sally Robard. And of course, the Robard was a very old family there. And during his time in Mercer County, he will represent Mercer County in the Virginia legislature. Then, eventually, he will move to Woodford County, where he will represent Woodford County in the legislature. But then, of course, and this is something that always interested me, he ended up in Bath County, of course, and that's where he died. But in 1822, I think, yeah, 1822 on March 1st. But this man came to a state that was totally in the throes of war. Totally bloodshed everywhere. And ladies and gentlemen, let me point out something to you. In many years, I was in error myself about this because I always thought that, there was a handful of settlers killed by the Indians, and we always just made it bigger. There were thousands that were killed. There were thousands whose names will never be remembered. There are people who never even got... People coming through the gap, they would be attacked. Sometimes they would be killed, every last one of them. They'd be coming down the Ohio River on a flatboat, never even touching the shore before they were killed. And one eyewitness said that one of the most horrifying sights he ever saw was a flatboat just floating aimlessly down the Ohio with nothing but corpses on it. And those poor people never even got to see the promised land, let alone step foot on it. And that is something that Jouett, though, thought Kentucky was important enough that he wanted to take the risks to come here. And it would turn out to be very good for him. He really did. He prospered. He was, I don't think you would call him rich, but he was a prosperous person. And after he married, he and his wife had 12 children. And I always think, if I had been Jack Jouett's wife or any wife on the frontier like that, and somebody wanted me to have 12 children, I probably would have tomahawked my husband. But the thing of women, ladies, and nothing taken away from the gentlemen here, but ladies, you've got to think how your ancestors, the female ancestors, what they had to put up with. Not only were they fighting alongside their men, but they had to have children, take care of them, cook, do everything else. And if you didn't have a horse or something to plow with, some guy put on the reins and pulled along a plow for your husband. So there to be, if ever there was a monument erected in, say, Frankfort or some prominent place, Frankfort's where it should be, there should be a statue that represents a Kentucky pioneer woman and their children, because those people really had no choice but to come to Kentucky with their husbands, and then, of course, many of them ended their lives trying to get there too. So that is something that I always felt very, very strongly about. But one of those 12 children, as you well know, became one of Kentucky's greatest artists, Matthew Harris Jouett. And I always loved what Jack Jouett supposedly said. I mean, the man had a sense of humor, I could see this. But when he sent Matthew to Transylvania to college, he said that he wanted to make him a gentleman of him. And then Jouett said of his son, and he has turned out to be nothing but a damn sign painter.